Welcome, investigator. Evil is on the rise. Crime is escalating. Our mission is to eliminate the crime by exposing evil, examine why it manifests, and highlight the brave souls that confront it every day. Join us as we work together to bring justice to every victim. Welcome to All Things Crime. Here's your host, Jared Bradley.
Again, to play devil's advocate, from what I've seen and how the police are treated and disrespected, and just the tension that is almost immediately there, especially, I mean, it's worse in some parts of the country than others. And obviously some of the cities around the country, I don't know how anybody stays in law enforcement, because those guys, not only is there massive amounts of tension with the public, but they don't have any support from their chain of command. And to me, that's just a nightmare. It's just they talk about, work conditions and a toxic work environment. Man, I can't think of anything worse. But anyway, that aside, based on today's current atmosphere, when, officers, they're getting shot all the time, getting shot at all the time. I think I saw the stat for the year 2023, there were almost 300 officers around the country that were murdered or killed. And many of those during traffic stops and just simple, you would think would be fairly simple police activities. Even, issuing a warrant turns out to be some of the most dangerous things that these guys can do. And so
actually domestics.
Yeah. Okay.
Domestic violence is one of the worst, because surprisingly, even though, let's say, a woman was beat to hell by her husband, when we go in to arrest him, she'll retaliate. She doesn't want him to go. It's almost the Stockholm Syndrome situation. That's why we never went in without two officers separating both.
Yeah.
But it's extremely dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. I wouldn't want to be a police officer in a big city. It's a war zone. No thanks.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, these guys, I mean, my hat's off to them, and just 2 days ago was National Law Enforcement Appreciation Day. And, there's a lot of people that posted, thanks for doing these things, but, how many of us actually go above and beyond that and really support, the law enforcement the way we should? And it's just, sometimes I'm like, you know what? You make decisions and you set environments and you create, how do you even say this? You create an atmosphere where it may not affect you immediately, but eventually it's going to negatively affect you and everybody around you. And I think that's kind of where we're at. And this stage has been being set for quite a while now.
Disaster.
And yeah. And I tell you, if you play this out another decade, it's not going to end well. And we've got to end it. Now, back to your book and why we're actually having this discussion. I 100% agree that people need to know their rights, and by knowing their rights and the deputies or the police officer also knowing his rights and what he's responsible for, of course, that you would think that would lessen the tension and kind of de-escalate the situation of where we're at. But, the problem is we have, all these kind of instigators on the other side that are just throwing gasoline on the flames all the time.
Well, let me give you an example of what you're referring to. And I refer to I write about all of these subjects in the book. But when I made an arrest, it was all about respect. It was all about, this citizen has committed an error. It's not my job to judge them, criticize them, or condescend with them. I always approached an arrest in this manner. I'd say, hey, look, we've got a problem here. Let's go to Cascade and get it fixed. And invariably, 99% of the time, they would go from hands ready to beat me, and they'd turn around, put their hands behind their back. Now, can you see the psychology I used?
Of course.
We, you and me, we.
Yeah.
Let's I didn't isolate them. I included myself as almost an advocate. And I did it with kindness. I didn't do it with condescension and, what younger officers, the way they approach it. That's unfortunate. I started when I was 41 officially as a law enforcement officer. And as I relate in the book, there was a certain amount of humility that I carried with it. And I lived by the adage that humility is the catalyst that makes power benevolent. With humility, we realize that power is not in us, it's vested in us. And to think it's of us, these young guys go around thinking that badge weighs 30 pounds and their chest sticks out. With me, but by the grace of God go I. I had some of the shit kicked out of me through the years. And I was humbled and I understood. Whether it be drunken driving, believe me, I have driven drunk. And I'm thankful I didn't get stopped. I admit it in the book. But I was very much an expert at DUI arrests because I knew they were an extreme danger to the public. And it was my job to safeguard the public from them. So it gets down to respect, kindness. Now, there gets to be a time when we have to use incrementation of force when it comes to dealing with some people. Sometimes they don't get it, so you raise your voice. And if they don't get it then, and they come at you, then you may have to use less than lethal weapons, whether it be OC spray, a taser. But too often now I'm seeing in the public officers going right to their pistol. It's just madness. And it's not lethal, not a lethal situation. It's just they don't have the training, and it just creates huge vulnerabilities to the counties, cities, or governments that control them. And I point that all out in the book, and it's a combination of good stories that also bring into play how one should react with their rights in any situation.
Yeah, it's interesting. Being actively interacting with not only law enforcement, but also the procurement and the financial sides of it, which I do with my business. I find that there are far too many, especially the larger agencies, and especially the ones that really don't get a lot of support. Kind of what is happening, and it's been happening for a while now, is number one, because of the work environment, they don't have enough officers, period. They're never really at full strength. My understanding is like the San Francisco PD, they are at less than 60, they're like 65% strength. So that means that for every 10 officers that should be on call or on duty, there's basically only 6 to 7 that are readily available that should be there. So they got to draw, if they need 100% strength, they have to draw from other people that should be sleeping. But there's also there's underfunding there. The officers.
Well, who wants to work for a department that in a liberal city where it's defund the police? I wouldn't want to do it. I'd go to a much middle size or a smaller county or whatever. Who needs that headache?
Oh, I like I said, I don't know how those guys keep doing it, but it's just a loyalty and a love of their city and the community that has to keep them going, because it's definitely not, the politicians are demonizing them all the time. And it's just crazy. But to my point, that a lot of these officers, because they're stretched so thin just to have, the boots on the ground and, the people out there patrolling, that they don't have time and they don't have the resources to send these guys to training and to get them,
Well, I should say continuing training. They all have to go through a certain amount in order to be certified. But you're correct. There's always a continuation of training, and that's what's lacking.
Yeah, well, but like you said, in the academy, you learned lots of things. You learned how to fire your weapon. You learned how to, do all sorts of, even SWAT activities. I'm sure I have a military background. And so, when I went through basic training, which I'm sure is basically equivalent to the academy, you don't get really, really in depth of very many subjects, because that whatever you're learning, when you get to your duty station, they are going to continue that training. Well, in today's environment, a lot of these agencies, they don't have the people, the manpower, because they're at like you said, 60 to 70% strength. And your ability to take some of your workforce and send them to a training for a week or 2 weeks you just don't have it. You don't have the manpower to do that. Right. And when the county or the city doesn't help with funding, doesn't help with hiring new officers and making the environment friendly enough, a workforce or a workplace environment that is friendly. I mean, if I get so upset when I hear about some of these things, because if the same thing happened, what is happening in some of our police agencies, if that same, toxic work environment existed anywhere else, that company would get sued, people would get fired. But when we're talking about, the police agency, it's almost like everybody just gets a pass. The mayor and the city council that are creating such a horrible workplace environment for these officers.
There's no accountability on the politicians' part. That's the problem.
There's none. Yeah,
you see that in Congress, the U.S. Congress, they allow that southern border to be wide open. You got criminal activity in the Biden administration and other senators and such, and nobody ever goes to jail. Nobody is accountable. And so they feel that they don't care. We'll do what we want. They pass laws continually to limit the right to bear arms, even though the Supreme Court and the appellate courts are knocking them down constantly. They just keep flooding their states with these laws that are just ridiculous. Yeah. And so there's a lack of respect, not only for these police officers, some of it warranted, some of it not, but also for government in general.
Yeah, it's a noble profession, and it's been demonized so much that I don't know. It's really hard to explain, because I don't think the people that are demonizing, especially the law enforcement profession, understand the repercussions of what they're doing.
Well, we're targets. As soon as we put on that uniform, the day we become an officer, we're a target, in uniform and out. And that's why most of us always carry a weapon. Because like with local people, they know where we live. And they will, if there's a bad guy out there, they'll come after us. And we are aware of it constantly. We are targets. And it's unfortunate, but those are the times in which it's always been like that, but not to the degree it is today.
No, I in 2020, when all those riots were going on, I have a couple of there's law enforcement guys, even Salt Lake PD, that live in my neighborhood, and during the riots right after the George Floyd incident, their home address was doxxed.
Yes.
And I was basically like, you know what, brother? When you go to work, trust me, in this neighborhood, your family's safe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's necessary.
Lord help anybody that comes into our neighborhood with bad intent, because there's even the guys that aren't law enforcement. The Second Amendment is alive and well in Saratoga Springs, I'll tell you that.
It's a very necessary thing.
Yeah.
Like Benjamin Franklin, I quote in the book a lot of people, but Ben Franklin was asked by a woman as he came out of the Continental Congress, "What form of government have you given us, sir?" And he replied, "A republic, ma'am, if you can keep it."
Right.
And it takes an educated, vigilant, and armed people to maintain the republic. And it's being destroyed.
Thanks for joining us. Your attention today brings us one step closer to exposing and eliminating the evil that brings crime to our communities. Hit subscribe and share this episode. Together, we will bring justice to every victim.